This is the Thrive Podcast with Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. And now, Pastor Fred Jeff Smith.
Hello, welcome to the Thrive Podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. I'm Fred Jeff Smith, pastor of Shiloh, and I'm very happy that you have taken the opportunity to either view on YouTube or listen on iTunes to this most recent Thrive Podcast. We want to remind you that we are interested in knowing what you think about the podcast. You can write me at fredjeffsmith@cox.net, fredjeffsmith@cox.net, and tell us how we're doing, good, bad, or otherwise. And we appreciate your viewership, your listenership, and we appreciate your input. I'm very happy today to welcome a neighbor of mine, a friend of mine, Mr. Todd Sterling, who is the founder of Alpha Media. He has 30 years of experience in media, working both in radio and in television. He is currently the host and executive producer of the Jaguar Football Show with Coach Dawson Odoms. And I guess I'll start with that. What kind of season are the Jaguars going to have this year?
You know, Reverend Smith, I believe we're going to be good. Last year we were second in the SWAC, and for lack of no hard work on the coaches' staff, we are loaded coming back, but Alcorn's going to be better, Gramblin's going to be better, and Prairie View's going to be better. So the competition got better as we did. So I think it's going to be a really exciting season in the SWAC, and my hope is that Coach Dawson Odoms and the Jaguar football staff definitely step up to the plate and have the ball bounce their way, as well as win some games they're supposed to win this year.
Let me ask you this question, because I do have a peeve. My father and I used to go to the ball games. I went from the age I was 6 until he couldn't go anymore.
Okay.
So I consider myself a Jaguar football fan. I do have a concern with the fact that these young men are being put out on the field as sacrificial lambs against certain schools where these athletes are bigger, stronger, faster, and it seems to be that it's being done for the athletic department to recoup a financial gain, but there's very little expectation of the team winning. Is that a fair assessment on my part, or do you find it unfair? It's okay to say that it's unfair.
No. I think your assessment is what a lot of people think when you have the rent-a-win games, as they call them. The big schools are looking for W's,
right?
Because that's what gets them into the bowl games.
Right.
The little schools are looking for paydays,
right?
Because in a school like Southern's case, a game against a Georgia or an SEC school could probably fund just about the whole athletic department to some degree for a year.
Right.
I mean, you think about it, if you can get a check for $750,000, $800,000 plus from one football game, that goes a long way to paying a lot of salaries and a lot of cost for a small school's athletic staff. My challenge on the football side of things is I think it's okay for a Southern to play an SEC school. I think that the coaches have to be real that there is the possibility of injury, but in most schools' case, there is an injury. It's just usually a lopsided win.
Right.
It's a great experience for the small school to see how the big/rich schools live, and usually everybody goes away with the expectation of what it is. But every now and then, the small school beats the big school.
Yes.
Because when it comes down to it, Reverend Smith, when it comes to a good quarterback, running back, wide receiver, defensive backfield, a lot of times it doesn't matter what school you are. If you can play ball, you can play ball.
Right.
The difference a lot of times is on the line. You know, if you're giving up 60, 70 pounds to a competitor, over time, over 4 quarters, you get beat down. You know, they're stronger, they're bigger, and so that's where the challenge becomes.
They have a deeper depth chart.
Then they have a deeper depth chart, exactly. They got 100 and plus scholarships to the SWAC schools, maybe 80 plus scholarships. So those are some of the challenges. But I tell you what, in the whole 23 years that I've produced the Southern University Football Coaches Show, I really enjoyed the opportunity to go to the bigger schools to see how they live. Last year, we played TCU. Mm-hmm. TCU is a very wealthy private school,
right,
and there was no embarrassment of riches at TCU. They have the best of everything, and it was just a good experience all the way around for the Southern kids. I thought for the Southern faithful, and again, early on you hope that it's going to be a competitive game. Ultimately it gets out of hand. But sometimes, like when we played Georgia, we were hanging in there with Georgia,
yeah,
and the ball bounces our way a couple of times. It's a closer game than what the score actually shows. So when you get that opportunity, I think you have to take it to some degree, because if not, there's a lot of bowling, softball,
right,
non-revenue generating sports that have to be paid for.
I get the economics of it.
Correct.
My question is about the psyche of the player on the field.
Yeah.
And this is something I don't know, because I don't get to talk to the players.
Right.
You have.
Right.
How do they feel about playing in these games?
I think they love it. It's the David and Goliath all the way back to the biblical terms, times. I think, I grew up with an uncle who was 3 years older than me, and so it was always fun to take down the older guys. There's a little pride in that,
yeah,
a little machismo in that.
Yeah.
So I think that the kids step up to the plate and like the challenge. I think the coaches like the challenge, because think about it, you beat a big school,
right,
your specter as a coach goes up,
yeah,
and your opportunity to make more money, because let's be honest, the SWAC school coaches probably max out at $350,000 plus.
Right.
Nick Saban's probably making $10 million plus for doing the same job, same hours, and if it wasn't for segregation, he wouldn't have some of those kids. Those kids would be at an HBCU.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I think that it's going to come a point where some schools are going to be making decisions not to play the smaller schools, because there's probably going to be some weight put on your schedule and who you played when it comes to making the bowl games. But right now, they're still playing those games. So my hope is that, that Southern has an opportunity to play some of those schools and can get that big payday.
Why, in your opinion, do you think that LSU has never scheduled Southern in football? I mean, they've scheduled other state schools.
Correct, and they play Grambling, I think, this year.
Yeah.
I think it's a capacity issue. They're already selling out Tiger Stadium, and so if you have a game with Southern and LSU, where are you going to put 20, 30,000 Southern fans when you're already selling out Tiger Stadium with Tiger fans? Most of those schools, they maybe give a 10,000, 15,000 allotment of tickets to their competitor, but I think it's a capacity thing. So there's been talks, though, that LSU would play Southern, because they've already played everybody else. They played USL, they played I want to say McNeese, they played ULM.
Monroe.
Yeah. So and this year I think they're playing Grambling. So I would assume Southern may have its day, but I think for LSU athletic director's office and staff, the challenge will be, how many tickets can you give to Southern, and still be able to have all your Tiger faithful, be able to get into the stadium. I think it'd just be a real cluster, just to put it mildly. So, but it may happen. I mean, again, they're playing Grambling this year, so if you're going to play Grambling, why not play Southern?
Why not play Southern?
Right.
Yeah.
So I just, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. I do know one little tidbit. A long time ago, when Nick Saban was here, Michael Hayes one of Southern's best wide receivers statistically. He was an LSU guy. He transferred, and then he became an All-American at Southern. And Nick Saban made a rule that no LSU kid, right, could come across town. You could leave Baton Rouge, but you couldn't come across town to Southern to play.
Because I remember when Jerry DiNardo was the head coach, there were 3 or 4 players that would leave LSU and come and play for Coach Richardson at Southern and had very successful college careers.
Correct.
And when Saban came to LSU, like you say, he closed that door. And I didn't know specifically that it was because of Michael Hayes that happened. But I always found that troubling. There are a lot of Alabama fans around here in Baton Rouge.
There are.
And I, to no small extent, I think that's because of Nick Saban. They pull for Nick Saban. This thing that I hear people say about Alabama is far more liberal, has a far more liberal history than LSU does as far as black athletes are concerned. It's really bogus.
It is.
Bear Bryant didn't want black athletes until he became
beat by USC,
until he got whipped, and he realized that he needed black athletes in order to win. And yes, LSU was later in coming to the party, but all of the SEC schools have similar history with regard to that. I was just curious, and we're going to leave sports because this isn't a sports show.
I know, but we could talk about this for an hour.
I was just curious, what do you think about why so much of black Baton Rouge supports Alabama? When Alabama beats LSU, Facebook is just lit up. Everybody's happy. Roll Tide, the whole 9 yards.
I'll give you 2 points, and we can move on to some other stuff. First off, LSU wouldn't let my grandfather go to LSU, and he used to root against LSU in marbles, jacks, and tiddlywinks. I'm not talking about football and basketball. Marbles, jacks. Because they made him go to, I think, Colorado to get his master's, to come back to Louisiana to start a high school, Pelican All Saints High School in Pelican, Louisiana. So I think that racist hate that was there for forever, today making the rounds of Facebook and social media is a letter from LSU's ex-president Middleton about the Negro at LSU not letting them participate in athletics, or if they wanted to go to the swimming pool, they would just close the swimming pool. Just ugly. And apparently it's coming out in Earl Campbell's book, and that's why the letter was released to the public. And that that mindset seems to prevail. A lot of people think that LSU does not want a black quarterback, though when they've had a black quarterback, they've had some of their more successful years. Herb Tyler was, a wonderful quarterback at LSU. He worked magic when he was back there. Rohan Davey put up big numbers, but it seems that they always default back to a white quarterback. And, that's one of the things that made Nick Saban popular. He played the best kid who was available to win, and LSU doesn't seem to have that. LSU on a grand scale doesn't seem to have that. And so I think a lot of black people like the fact that Nick Saban would play the best athlete at whatever position it was to win, whereas at LSU the prevailing mindset is that they're going to play who they think is the best person for the job, which may not get you the results you want on the field. But then again, Nick Saban also could walk into someone's home and say, I know what it takes to get your kid to the NFL. And I think a lot of black families who have their hopes that their child can go to the NFL and get that payday, they like that. And people like a winner. Nick has won consistently. Nick has won unapologetically, and he's beat LSU pretty much
6 times straight. 6 times
so he seems to own LSU.
So much so that they moved the game this year. It's not going to be a night game. It's going to be an afternoon game.
Is that right?
Because it's not drawing the same kind
numbers
of interest,
Yeah.
because people have an expectation
Yeah.
that Alabama is going to win. Now the season might play out in a different way, and they might change that. But right now, the decision is that it's going to be an afternoon game and not a night game.
Yeah, a lot of people I know like Alabama, and it's funny because again, you go, why? What's your
Yeah.
connection to Alabama?
Yeah.
And they really have no connection. They just like a winner.
Yeah.
And Alabama's been winning.
So tell me about Todd Sterling.
Okay.
We started with football.
Yeah.
You're a native of Baton Rouge.
I am.
What is the Todd Sterling story?
It's a story of a kid being born to a beautiful mother and a cool father. I went to Mayfair Elementary. I started at Mount Zion First Baptist Church. I went to pre-K and kindergarten there, and then I went to Mayfair Elementary, St. Francis Xavier for middle school, Redemptorist for high school, Northwestern State for college, and came home and had a 15-year career in radio, sales, middle management, and as a general manager. And then, what I realized was in the corporate world, they're always trying to figure out ways to take a little more money from you. And so I said, I'm going to do my own thing. And so I started Alpha Media and Public Relations to do my own thing. Along the way, I realized that, because I played sports growing up, I ran track and played football in high school, played basketball recreationally in church leagues, and that was always my favorite sport. Well, I get to about 30 plus, and I start to realize I can't keep chasing this ball because I might bust an Achilles or pull a hamstring. And so politics kind of became my sport, and really enjoyed the win and loss of politics while I worked for Citywide Broadcasting, Q106 XOK. Helped a lot of people in their campaigns on the media side win their races. And so when I went out and did my own thing, it was a big part of what Alpha Media was. And we've had some success. We won, helped Mary Landrew win and lose. We helped John Bell win. We've helped a number of judges and state reps. Right now I'm in a race with Patricia Haynes-Smith, state rep Patricia Haynes-Smith. She's running for Senate.
Yes.
And so that's going to be a hotly contested race. But, I think when it's all said and done, media is an important job in the world, and especially our community, because it's the exchange of information. And you want that information to be factual. You want it to be as honest as it possibly can. But ultimately, you wanted to help people. You wanted to help people to make a decision. You wanted to be able to help people to save money. You wanted to be able to help people to make informed decisions about goods, products, services, elections. And so I enjoy media. It's an important job to me, and most of the things that Alpha Media does are driven by some form of media. So.
Well, in this upcoming election season, the state legislature is up for election and or re-election this year. National politics does trickle down into state and local politics. The championing of Donald Trump, which seems to be taking place across the nation, particularly in the South.
Pathetic.
It is pathetic, but it trickles down into state and local politics. From my vantage point, what it has done is it has given a lot of conservative white folk permission to say what's always been on their mind.
Right.
What's your view on that?
It definitely has opened the door for hate that had probably been closed or at least pushed to the back of the room for my lifetime. I'm 52. I'll be 53 in November. And, I was born to a world where King was killed and JFK was killed, Bobby Kennedy was killed, Malcolm X was killed, and all those horrible things like people getting bit and hosed and beat to have the right to vote, to have the right to go into a store, to have the right to have their money respected. All of those things were happening during the time that I was born. And so, I grew up in the 70s, and you see people making strides. And, I grew up into South Baton Rouge that had a really, really thriving black business community. Scotlandville, the Park area, all those were, thriving black business spaces. And then, when you look at it and people start to do the integration thing, you realize that for whatever reason, the black business community collapsed. And, when you start to talk about the rise of a guy like Donald Trump, he told you that he was an American thug. Somebody that tell you he'll grab a woman by her private parts. Somebody that actually said in a news interview that if he ever ran for for president, he'd run as a Republican because they're stupid and they'd vote for anything. This is not something I'm just saying.
Yes.
It's all on tape. It's all factual history, and yet people still voted for him. The crazy thing about the Trump phenomena is that people seem to, and the people that support him seem to be okay with lies, seem to be okay with just lying about things as serious as being Christians. Because you got evangelicals putting a guy who's a thug on a pedestal, and this guy is nothing. You wouldn't hire him to be your janitor or your dog catcher if he came to your organization and you knew all of his ill-gotten gains and all the stuff he had done. And so you have people who you say are, upwardly standing people who vote for and support him. And so what I believe at this point, Reverend Smith, is showing the really ugly underbelly of hate in America, and it's also showing the truth of white supremacy. For some reason, there's a whole cadre of white folks from poor to rich who feel like they're losing something. And it's like, you're not losing anything. All these laws, all these institutions in America were made to, support you and to make sure you succeeded. And everybody else is just trying to get a piece of the American pie.
Right.
And we're all doing it, by hard work and effort. Nothing's handed to us. And they make it be like something is handed to us. I hate to see what's going on at the border with the immigrants. It reminds me of Hitler and Nazi Germany.
Yes.
Our grandfathers, great-great-grandfathers, fought a war, spent a lot of capital and lives, a lot of capital and resources to fight evil like Hitler, and yet you let a guy like Donald Trump put kids in cages to the tune of hundreds and thousands, and not, give them what they need to be functional, like soap and toothbrushes and, bathroom facilities. And you go, is this really America? And then you say, yes, it really is America, because they did African Americans horribly like that.
Right.
And they've done other people horribly like that.
Native Americans.
They've done
Japanese Americans.
Exactly. So, when you ask yourself, what is going on, you really think that America's losing its soul. Because you got a guy like Donald Trump. For me, a guy who just told you his education bona fides, I was always told that you had to work hard and you had to really, really pay your dues to get to places in life. And you mostly respected people who had education, experience, bona fides, and this guy doesn't even read his presidential briefings from experts, and he's just operating by the seat of his pants.
Yes.
And he's committed treason.
Yes.
And he's done so much other horrible things.
Yes.
And he's basically, if it wasn't you, I'd use a profanity on the office of the presidency of the United States.
Yes.
It's like, man, do you realize that is probably one of the most important jobs that you can have in this world, being the leader of the free world, being the leader of democracy, and you realize that there are certain groups of people who don't care about it. All they care about is money. All they care about is control and power. And so they'll let the world become a cesspool of pollutants, and the water polluted, and soil polluted, and opioids and drugs running rampant in our communities, all behind dollars and cents.
Yeah.
So it really shows the world that, America is bought and sold every day. And if you got the money, you can just about do anything you want to do in America.
I am born and bred in the church. My whole life has been in the church.
You had a good daddy. That was
yes, I did.
He was a very good preacher, and a lot of respect for the bricks that he paved. So you have no choice.
Yeah, this is my world. This is my life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I am so embarrassed by the church, and I'm always careful, because saying the church is like saying the government.
Right.
You have to be specific about what you're talking about, because there's local government, state government, different branches of government. When I say the church, I'm talking about evangelical white Christians and the black folk who attend their churches, who 25 years ago, when this was Bill Clinton, who had not done nearly as much, or at least had not been discovered to have done nearly as much as Donald Trump has admitted to doing. These same people were saying he wasn't fit for office, he needed to be impeached, and they led the fight to impeach him. And,
correct.
And yet,
spent a lot of resources.
When it's Donald Trump, these same people, same groups, are saying, well, we're not electing a preacher, we're not electing a pastor, we're electing a president. The fact that people can affirm someone who can't even properly pronounce 2 Corinthians,
I know,
and does not make his way to a church, has said, I don't need to ask God for forgiveness for anything that he's on record as saying, I don't need to ask God for forgiveness for anything. And yet these Christian evangelicals continue to promote him, support him, vote for him. I'm most troubled. I'm troubled by that. It's an embarrassment. It's a stain on the church. But I'm most troubled by the fact that there's still a 15% contingent of African American folk who will attend those evangelical churches and don't see anything wrong with that. As a man who has been raised in the church, what do you think? What comes to mind when you see that?
To be quite honest with you, Reverend Smith, I think that the term house Negro is still apropos. When you go to church with people who vote for a Donald Trump, on whatever reasons they vote for a Donald Trump, it scares me that you would go and sit next to a person and, singing Kumbaya and praising and worshiping and all that, but then know that as soon as you walk out of that church, they're voting against the welfare of your family, the health of you, the whatever American dream you have, they are against it. I find that it is strange that that there are people who seem to want to be oppressed.
Yeah.
There are people out there who seem to think that, Donald Trump is right, and it just kind of lets you know how ignorant a lot of people are. Louisiana, largely a red state, and its politicians that we send to Washington, right now, I think the only statewide elected person that's a Democrat is the governor.
Yes.
And so what you have, to me, is largely an ignorant populace who are voting against their own interest, because you're talking about people who make less than median income, who are voting for people who are trying to kill off anything that helps people that make less than median income.
Yeah.
So when you look at yourself in the mirror and you're brushing your teeth and you're washing your face and you're combing your hair, and you go and you vote for a guy who is against all that. He voted to give a tax break to billionaires, and it's already proven to be a scheme that didn't benefit anybody but billionaires.
Yeah.
You ask yourself, if you're not a billionaire, how stupid are you? And so, for me, I realize that there's the term cultural Republican, and that's where they aren't fiscally considered Republicans by Republicans, but because of their hate and their dislike for everything, they call themselves Republicans. So it's a strange land to be in when you have people who hate for no reason. I always tell people, you have no reason to hate us. You brought us here, treated us worse than animals, and then through it all we survived. Through it all we are here, and then you still find reasons to try to manipulate and control the narrative of how we should live and how we should do things. And so it's troubling when you get to the place and you start talking about church. Now, I'm going to go to a place because you asked me my thoughts that's really troubling to me. And this is one that, I got to talk to podland people that I never quite understand. If you read the Bible, you realize that all the places Jesus walked were basically North Africa, Egypt and Bethlehem and all of that. So I would say these people were probably the same color as you and me.
Yes.
And the Bible says he had hair like lamb's wool, so that means he probably had, a natural kind of like mine or somewhere between you and me. And so, the reality is Jesus, Mary, Joseph, that whole ilk were probably African people, people of dark hue, and then you walk in all these churches and it's a white, blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus on the wall, including black churches. And I always ask myself, I said, when you get old enough to understand, how do you continue to put that image out there for people when, as an African American, and somebody with, an education, as most preachers are now, having doctorates in theology, you spend a lot of time in the Bible and you spend a lot of time reading, and you can't help but to know a little bit of geography when you are a person who is in the ministry, if you are really serious about it. And it's like, for me, it's like, at what point do you realize that, not only have you changed the narrative of who Jesus was and where they're from, but you have changed the whole look of who this person was. And, if this person was so good and right that we worship him and, we feel like, he is who we all should aspire to be, why do you hate that person so much? And so, I don't know. It's a hard question to ask, and it's really troubling when you have to try to deal with it with children. When you ask yourself, if a child is reading his or her Bible, and they get to a place where they realize, Daddy, where is this? And you show them, and then they start to read and they start to understand, some of the things. And they go, well, why does it look like that? And so, when it's all said and done, America and the world has some reckoning to do about its treatment of darker hued people everywhere. You see it in Italy with the soccer players. They treating them bad, grunting like monkeys and all of this. And it's like, man, this kid's a soccer player. What do you have to be racist about a soccer player for? And the whole Kaepernick thing here, basically this guy should get paid $1 gazillion, and I hear that he and our local guy Eric Reed are getting paid by the NFL. But 30 years from now, this guy will be exalted, because if you remember correctly, they hated Muhammad Ali.
Yes, they did.
But now he's everybody's ad campaign champion and hero.
Yeah.
But when he was alive, they hated him.
Yes.
For saying the things they did and walking a righteous life. So my hope is that people who are trying to live righteous in these times can be appreciated for it while they're here and not have to be waiting 30 years to die to get that appreciation.
Yeah. With regard to the depictions of Jesus as being white and European, it is the European appropriation of the church that has permeated American Christendom, even down to the African American church, putting white Jesus in our sanctuary, the art depictions being of a white Jesus. When this church was built in 1972, Jesus and John the Baptist, which hang over the baptismal pool, were both white. Sometime in the early 2000s, some members of the church approached my father, Reverend Charles C. Smith, about changing Jesus's hue, and he did. And so the artist or an artist came back and darkened the picture. And at first, I'll be honest with you, I had problems with that, because I was of the opinion that what the scripture says about our worship of God is that God is neither male nor female, slave nor free. And so why are we getting so caught up in that? Subsequently, I have come to understand that people need to identify with Jesus on a human level.
They do.
And they need to be able to see themselves in Jesus. And so I have had to repent of my own opinions about that change that took place.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a challenge. I think it becomes even more of a challenge, Reverend Smith, when you are a person who has attended church, who has tried to live a righteous life, and then things just kind of never go your way. And you pray, and you pray, and your mama prayed, and your grandmama and them prayed, and things just didn't go their way. And so I think a lot of people's faith gets challenged. I think a lot of people's faith gets questioned. And so, you know, if you don't have that hope, you don't have that belief, what do you have? But what I hope is that people realize that there is no way but Jesus, there is no way but Christ, and that at some point you have to look at, there had to be something higher than whatever to create this world. It's all its beauty, people, and all their incredible opportunities to create the things that they've created, to create society. You know, and a lot of that came from, you know, places that were, it was necessary to create these things. For me, I'm a person who believes that a lot of people are kind of in a purgatory of not believing, not wanting to go to church, even though they may have grown up going to church. A good friend of mine who's an atheist, sometimes he and I go back and forth a little bit on Facebook about, you know, his non-belief. And, you know, I always tell him, you know, man, I said, you know, you're definitely entitled to your opinion. I said, but I sure hope you're wrong. So, you know, I hope you're wrong. And even in our joshing and going back and forth, I still tell him I'm praying for you to find Jesus. But, you know, it's a challenge. It's a challenge when you see people who do evil, who do wrong, achieve material wealth, and unfortunately, a lot of people achieve. They look at success as material achievement, whether it be money, whether it be houses, cars, whatever it is. And you know, I think that people need to start to realize that shouldn't be the barometer. You know, the barometer should be a healthy family. The barometer should be realizing what is for you is for you. Not everybody was put here to be wealthy, and not everybody was put here to be poor. But the Bible says the poor will be with us always.
Yeah.
And so the challenge becomes, do what you can to help somebody who's not doing as well as you, and realize there's always going to be somebody doing better than you.
Right.
So just challenges, challenges with accepting what is your fate in life, and then how to change that to a degree, if you can, via education, via hard work. I think that sometimes you can get out of your status in life if you change your mindset and put some work in and get an education. Certain careers offer you a higher income, and if that's what you want, you got to make that sacrifice.
Right.
And I know from my family, it's always been about education.
Yeah.
You can definitely, be happy with the status quo, but if you really want to try to ascend, if you really want to try to make some money that is not median, you gotta get something in your head, and you got to get into a career that pays above average. So I think that the message for people is to not to settle, and to look at what their opportunities are, and then figure a way out of their situation if they're trying to be upwardly mobile.
Talk about the sacrifices of entrepreneurship in a society, in an environment that is not always welcoming to black entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I think it's a challenge. It's not for everybody, because I think, I was always taught by my family, go to school and get a good job. Go to school, work hard, get you a job, work up the ladder, retire in 30 years,
right.
Get you a gold watch, and, play with your grandbabies, that whole ethos. I think people are starting to realize that isn't the way it should be. At least Todd Sterling thinks that's not the way it should be. I think you should get an education, get some experience, and try to start your business. Because business owners have the most taxable freedoms in America. Business owners have the most flexible freedoms, and they're the most desirable people in America for companies and places and things as we have evolved. When you start to talk about work and entrepreneurship, I think entrepreneurship requires you to grind when everybody else is sleeping. Entrepreneurship, requires you to make some tough decisions to get to a place to where you can enjoy the fruits of your labor. And some people aren't built for that. Starting out in my business, it's really scary because, I worked in media on a commissionable basis, and, you got a check coming every 2 weeks. Well, when you're an entrepreneur, that check may not come every 2 weeks.
Right.
So you got to budget your money for when the money does come to last until this next period, until you get to a place where you're doing okay. And I think that, as I talk to high school and college students, about entrepreneurship, I always tell them, get your education, because nobody can ever take that away from you, and you always have that to fall back on. But I always say you really should go somewhere and work for a year, 2 years, 3 years, until you figure it out on what you want to do, because you need to understand how policy and behaviors and managing yourself in a business environment works before you just go out there and start your own thing.
Right.
Now, some people can go out there and start their own thing and, catch luck in a bottle, and, they're all over the success. But then most people, especially of our hue, they have to work a little bit harder at it.
Yeah.
And strive a little bit harder at it. And so I think you got to pay some dues. You got to respect other people's success, and then you got to, on your time after work and on weekends and as you work for somebody else and try to get your own thing going, you got to really grind to get yourself to a place to where you can be an entrepreneur. And then at that point, you got to get good people around you and operate in a good manner. And then there's 2 rules for business. A lot of times we get one shot.
Yes.
You look at it, whether it be in the coaching world or whether it be the business world. A lot of times you get one shot to show what you got, and you don't get that shot again, unfortunately. Whereas other people, they can just get all kinds of opportunities, and the banks continue to loan them money.
Yes.
And all of that. So I think you have to realize who you are, and where you are on the status rung of the opportunity to get capital, the opportunity to get opportunities, and realize that you don't have maybe the same freedoms as other people to screw it up, and you better respect the business of business, or you won't be in business.
Given that reality, and I agree with you 100%, I know that you're a father of children that are moving into that age.
Young adulthood.
Young adulthood. I'm a father of a 24-year-old and a 22-year-old, and sometimes I wonder if they're 4 and 2 and not 24 and 22. But how do you pass on your work ethic to your children? Because clearly you have your own strong work ethic, but the fact that you have it doesn't mean that it's something that your children inherit.
No, my children, I laugh with my friends and colleagues and say, when I die, I want to come back as one of my children, because they got it going on.
Yeah.
My children are 21 and 23. And you try to instill in them a good work ethic from a young age, so that you never know when you're going to die, Reverend Smith. And what you want, and what I always tell people, from my 2 children that God gave me, I just want to know that Todd and Elise Sterling can feed themselves and navigate in this world, because this is a cruel world.
Yes.
So I'd like to see them, before I close my eyes, get into their profession, what they want to do in life, and be successful in navigating the pitfalls and pratfalls of work until they're at a place where they kind of writing their own path, and they can hopefully one day maybe get married and have a family and be happy and live the life that me and their mother have given them. But part of that is them having to see you sacrifice,
right,
and work and burn some midnight oil and build relationships and really do the things that are necessary to be successful. What's funny in America is that Republicans are considered conservative and Democrats are considered liberal, but let's be honest, African Americans are the real conservatives in America, because we had to be.
Yeah.
We didn't have much.
Right.
And so to be able to manage a house, feed a house, clothe a house, insure a house, you have to be conservative and you have to be frugal to make the little money that you do have go all those places. And so we're conservative by nature.
Yeah.
We're conservative by necessity. And so having your children see that frugality, having your children know that you need to save 30 cents or 20 cents or 10 cents of a dollar, and don't spend it all. And just because you got it, you don't need those new tennis shoes.
Right.
Or just because we may have it, we're not buying this Range Rover. I think that kids see that, and I think kids start to realize that at some point they have to make those decisions for themselves on how to manage money. And for me, it goes to a place of, I'm from a family of educators. I really believe as early as in middle school, some financial literacy needs to be taught in schools. And, it's criminal that it hasn't been happening, but you every year graduate a high school class of people who are young adults who really have no idea how to manage money. And one of the first things they do if they do go to college is they get a credit card app to get, $2,500, $5,000 of credit, and then you go and you get that and you start spending it, and then you don't have no way to pay it back, and
Correct.
automatically you're in creditor's jail or hell or whatever, however you want to call it. So for me, I think you definitely have to start getting financial literacy in the schools as early as middle school, so that when they get to high school, they have some semblance of, how to manage money. And then I think that people can start to be a little bit more successful in their decision making on, if I really want to go to college and get a degree that can help me to get into what I want to get into, or if I should go the vocation route and learn how to weld, or learn how to do automotive repair, or learn how to...
And we pushed our kids away from that.
Right.
There's a whole segment of the black community that said, no, you've got to go to college, you've got to get the 4-year degree. And I know what my parents meant by that.
Right.
And I know that they were looking out for my best interest, my brother and my sister's best interest. But the truth of the matter is, not everybody is intended to go to college. And you don't have to go to college in order to be successful. And I think this generation is figuring that out in ways that we didn't figure it out, because I went where my father told me I was going.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that, what we've come to realize is that a lot of times you may go 4, 5, 6 years to a college, spend all this money, accrue this debt, and your degree is only worth $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year max.
Yeah.
And you're never going to be able to pay the student loan back, and you're never going to get to a place where you're financially solvent based on some of these degree offerings. Some of these degree offerings are into dead jobs and opportunities, and so I think you're at a place where people need to relook at, should I go to Southern LSU or should I go to BRCC?
Right. Should
I go to BRCC or should I go to vocational school is now rolled, I think, into BRCC.
Yeah.
But you got Fraser Votech and the Votech that used to be off of Windburn.
Right.
I think those are all a part of BRCC now.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, the plumber makes darn good money.
Every time I have to call.
Right, exactly. And a lot of the welders make stupid money.
Yeah.
Riverboat pilots make more money than doctors.
6-figure incomes.
I mean, not just 6 figures, almost $350,000 income.
Yeah.
So, those are a lot of things that a lot of people just really, really, some of them didn't know about it, but we've come too far to say you didn't know what some of these people were making. Now you know.
Yeah.
And the question is, is your child willing to do what's necessary discipline-wise to be able to get that welding license or that plumbing degree? I have to give you an example. My father was a brilliant electrician naturally, not by education, but I guess from necessity. And he went, when I was a man, to Fraser Votech up until I think the last month to get his electrical license. And he quit, and he quit college after 3.5 years. And, I told him, I said, Pop, see, man, you can't quit. I said, you're doing electrical jobs for $50 an hour. I said, you get this piece of paper, you can do it for $125 an hour. And I said, you can't quit. You gotta do it. And he just didn't have the stick-to-itiveness to stay and get that electrical degree. But if anybody takes anything from what I've said today, those licenses offer you the opportunity to make a good living for your family, make a good living for your children, make a good living for whatever you consider a good living in those fields that are in demand.
Yeah.
So I think education has come to a place where we realize that going to college isn't the end-all, be-all. And I don't know what the math is now, but I would probably say 60% of the people who get a college degree aren't working in the field that they went into.
Right.
And even today, I have a young lady who's a cousin of mine who just graduated in May, and she's working at a plant And we talked on the phone last night, and I said, well, I thought you were going to be a physician's assistant. And she said, well, I still want to do that. She said, but, the place I'm working at, they're really, really trying to get me to change my mind. And I'm doing a lot of research and using a lot of the skills I acquired in my education, working for this industrial concern. And I said, I want you to follow your dream. If that's what you want to do, if the job that you're doing is fulfilling and you're happy, great. But if you really want to be a physician's assistant, go ahead on and, make that sacrifice and, walk away from that money because it's only going to get better. As you get better at what you do for them, they're going to offer you more money, promotions, and then you're going to look up in 10 years, you're going to be at this plant when you really want to be a physician's assistant. Yeah. So I just, I think you got to ask yourself what you want to do. I think you got to follow, your dream if you can, if you have a path to follow it. And, hopefully you can get to a place to where when you wake up in the morning and you go to do work and you don't mind, that's when you're at a great place. As a minister, every day I'm sure you come to work, you have an opportunity to talk to some people who really are going through some tough things and some challenges in their life. And a lot of times you're giving people a word that inspires them to do better, inspires them to step up to their challenge, inspires them or helps them in whatever way there is. Some days you don't. Some days that word just doesn't connect. But I would assume a lot of times it does connect, and that's a beautiful thing.
It is.
And so you shouldn't mind getting up every day if you love what you do and you realize, this is what I was put here to do. Yeah. I feel kind of the same way about what I do in media. I love seeing the business owners I work with make more money. I love seeing them reach more people. I love seeing them have more success, and usually that translates into my success because they'll probably refer me or they'll probably do more business with me. And so, if that's the case, when you go to sleep at night, you wake up and you go, okay, let's go get them. Because you got to do something. Yeah. So if you don't mind getting up, in the morning, I think you're at the place that you should be at work-wise. And if you are at a place that, oh, man, I got to go to work, you really ought to think about where you're working.
My father used to say to me all the time, the worst thing in the world is to have to get up and go to a job that you hate every day.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I have not had that experience. I'm very grateful. I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I thank God for that. Media is an artistic endeavor, and yet entrepreneurship is the antithesis of art. How do you blend those two worlds together successfully?
I don't know that I do it successfully. I think I've had a lot of fortune. I think God smiles on me to some degree, and I actually hate the business side of it. I wish I didn't. I wish I spent more time on the business side of it. But I love the artistic side of it, and I love the factual side of it. If you have enough reach and frequency with your message, 9 times out of 10 you're going to get people to hear that message, and those people are going to respond if they want or need a product or a service. And if they need it, they're going to respond to your message sooner. If they just want it, they'll go get that suit when they're good and ready. But if you got a need for a blue suit because you wear a blue suit on a regular basis, if you hear that commercial, it's going to make you go get that blue suit. So, I think when you start to put together campaigns for clients in media, ultimately, if you had everything that you could want to be successful, that's kind of rare because most people have a limitation of money. So a lot of times people want to do broad campaigns. They need to be on radio, TV, billboard, social media, some digital, all of that, some print. But then when you get right down to it, they only have enough money to do one or two things.
Right.
And so you got to really kind of help them to zone in
now
on.
That leads me to a different question.
Sure.
It's around the same subject, but having to do with us, black folk. How do you tell folk, I can't cut you a kinfolk deal just in order to accommodate your wishes? Because every time somebody comes to you, come on, bro, can't you cut me a break? How do you explain to people that you have the same expenses that everybody else does?
You know, that is the age-old fact of being an African American, that, you know, people are looking for a hookup. And it's not just us. The Middle Easterners, they're the worst. They negotiate with everybody. They think if, you know, something's $5, they can get it for $3.
Right.
The Jewish people, they negotiate, and it's, you know, just never seen as wrong. It's just seen as a part of their culture. I think at some point there's a place where you need to let somebody make some money, let them give you a deal where they can do a great job for you, but then they also can make a profit so they can feed their family.
Yeah.
And I don't really have that answer of, you know, how do you get people out of that. I just think people
Well, let me ask you this way.
I think
Are
people
you frustrated by it?
Sometimes you are. You know, sometimes you say you expect me to do it for X, but you go down the street and you pay triple X.
Yes.
And you ask yourself, you know, why must I play this game with people?
Yes.
And sometimes you just gotta walk away. Sometimes you go, that business isn't for me.
Right.
And then other times, I think you have to, you know, say, well, if I do this deal, I can get more business from it. Or if I do this deal, XYZ will see it, and they'll see the quality of my work. And so I think you got to ask yourself, what's the best place for you to be when you go to do a deal. But, you know, the hope is that you get to a place to where you don't have to deal with folks who are trying to get the kinfolk deal all the time, and you have more folk who really want you because you really are good in the space you work in, and they'll pay what you ask because they realize, you know, you got bills. You know, you got a house note, you got car notes. In my case, 2 children in college, a pretty wife. You know, all those things cost, Reverend
Absolutely.
Smith. So for me, I just think you got to you know, be honest with your clientele and be honest with yourself on what you need to do something for someone in whatever space that may be.
As we approach the legislative session, I'm covering as many grounds because I got to stop.
Okay.
I'm covering as many different grounds as I possibly can. As we're approaching this legislative election, the census is coming up, and it's very important that we have appropriate representation in the Louisiana legislature for the redistricting that will result from the 2020 census. What is your insight? What is your projection as to what's going to happen with redistricting? Do you have an insight on that?
Yeah, there's going to be redistricting, and you know, my hope was that redistricting would be more based in reality instead of these gerrymandered districts that we have currently. But when you elect a guy like Donald Trump and he elects people who are supporters of his financially and of the same mindset as his, you get a Supreme Court who says a gerrymandered district is a good thing. And that lets you know that we're in a bad space because, you know, representation means everything, whether you're white, black, green, yellow. You know, if you are a minority and you live in an area, you definitely want to be represented by someone who understands you, even better if they look like you and live in the same space as you. It's one thing to be able to reach out and touch Reverend Fred Jeff Smith because he lives in my neighborhood, versus me having to go across town to try to find Reverend Smith because I need to talk to him about something. Same way with politics. If you can't pick up the phone and call your elected official, you probably don't have access.
Right.
And I think people need to realize that in America, this is the way, access and opportunity is given, and it's about how you participate in this democracy. My hope is that lines are drawn a little bit more realistic based on where you live. For example, our current congressman, Cedric Richmond, he lives in New Orleans.
Yes.
But the way they gerrymandered a district, it's New Orleans, it snakes up the river to a pocket of Baton Rouge, when in all honesty and factuality, he should be in New Orleans, and we should have another congressman in Baton Rouge who represents the people of Baton Rouge.
Right.
So that, I believe, is coming, and how they draw it will be the question.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see, because the people that you vote for this fall will be a party to that redistricting that's coming up.
Yeah.
So this election is super important because you need to have people that look like you at the table when the redistricting comes up, so they can say, no, we need this to be a district that makes sense for people to vote on, so that you can get good representation in the United States Congress for this group of people.
And in our state legislature.
Correct.
I understand that there's going to always be a white majority in the state legislature, at least in my lifetime. But these districts where white politicians are seating 80 to 85% black districts over here, so that they only have 5% black districts over here that they can continue to dominate. That's not working for us.
No, it's not.
And some of us need to recognize the importance of increasing black population in majority white districts, so that white politicians are forced to listen to black folks' issues.
Yeah.
Even if the representative is white, you can't just ignore 25 or 30% black population within your district. You have to pay attention to what they're saying.
Yeah, I live in Concord. Well, we're neighbors. Yeah. You live in Stratford, I live in Concord. And looking at a map recently, it is amazing how one of these district lines was drawn. It's drawn so that one district starts way down in Riverbend and comes up downtown, and then it loops around College Drive, picks up Valley Park, Concord, and Stratford. But on this side of Perkins Road, if anybody knows, it was in the podcast world, knows Baton Rouge, from I would say Acadian Thruway, down Perkins Road, back south, it becomes a whole nother district.
Right.
I mean, literally, it's like a peninsula within a district, and it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Because the people on this side of Perkins Road may not make as much as the people on this side of Perkins Road, but it ain't far apart.
Right.
It's not like apples and oranges. It's not the ghetto and the country club.
That is correct.
But at the same time, I think people have to stand up and say, hey, Mr. Representative or senator or council person, I live in your district, and I want to talk to you about some things that are happening that I want. And I think that people start to take it seriously.
Yeah.
I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and business owners have no problem reaching out saying, I'm building a neighborhood, I'm building a store, I'm doing this, I need to talk to you about it. Regular people need to realize that they can do that too with their politicians, and they got to realize that they really need to do that when it comes time to talk to their politicians about education, about health care, about jobs and opportunities, because they're critical. And if you aren't talking, that means that you must not care. and so you just get what you get.
Right.
If you care,
right,
you're going to make the time and the effort to go and talk to somebody about your child's education, or you and your child's health care, or your opportunity for work. And so my hope is that people get a little bit more involved with the political process. And my hope is that people get out to vote. I mean, ultimately, the governor is up for election, a couple of key races in the state legislature, some judges. So I think it's going to be a healthy political season as far as people getting out to vote. But you and I both know, the only reason Trump is in office is because people were apathetic.
Yes.
People didn't go to vote. Yeah. And that's people across all hues. They thought that, somebody else was going to do it for them.
Right.
And they didn't. And so you end up with a Donald Trump as president,
yeah.
Which is a total joke to the world. So for me, my hope is that people take their right to vote seriously, exercise their franchise, and get them and their families out to vote this fall.
Got to stop. I need to ask you, hopefully you'll come back. I hope you enjoyed this experience.
Sure, I did. It was good.
You told me before we started that you're not really into podcasts. I hope this will help feed your interest into podcasts.
I'm gonna go and listen to this one for sure to see how crazy I sounded, or if I was right on point on some stuff.
You're right on point.
Well, I appreciate that.
I always ask every guest this question, either about themselves, or in your case, it will be about your children, because I think you've already made up your mind. Here's where you're going to live. Given what you know about Baton Rouge, native of Baton Rouge, raised a family in Baton Rouge, would you like to see your children, your African-American son and daughter, spend their years in Baton Rouge? I know that they have their own right and they have their own minds and what have you, but if they said, I'm going to plant my flag in Baton Rouge, would you be good with that?
It is my hope. Just being a family-centric guy, I stayed in Baton Rouge because I'm a big mama's boy. Mm-hmm. My mom is a single mother, only child, and I wanted my kids to be able to grow up close to their grandmother because I had that dynamic, and it was wonderful, to be able to go to your grandmother's house and get that love that your mama and your daddy don't give you, to hear those stories.
Right.
My great-grandmother, I used to go to her house, and she didn't ask you if you was hungry. She asked you what you wanted to eat, and she'll go about the business of cooking that.
Yeah.
That's how good I had it, Reverend Smith. So I would hope that my kids could stay here. But what I know about Baton Rouge is it seems that a lot of people have this mentality of paying people the least possible, which is really, really ugly. Mm-hmm. If you go to school or you get a certification to earn something on the fair, open market, you should pay people what they're worth. You should pay people commensurate with whatever the marketplace says. Unfortunately, a lot of young people, and they always talk about the Louisiana youth brain drain, is because they can go right there to Texas, to Houston, or Dallas, or they can go right there to Atlanta, or they can go to other cities and earn double or whatever the fair market rate is, right, and what kind of profession they're in. So, I would hope that my son graduates in December, my daughter next May. My hope is that if they can get a great opportunity in Baton Rouge, that they stay and we can have that dynamic, that family dynamic close. But if they if the marketplace won't pay them fair wage, I would love to see them get out of here and go see some other part of not just the country, the world, and have the opportunity to be free and earn financially whatever they're worth, to earn, and do what they want to do professionally, and to be happy. Ultimately, I think when people are happy, they're more fulfilled.
Right.
When people are happy, there's less strife. When people are happy, there's less dumb stuff. So, I pray for my children those things, to be fulfilled in their work, to be happy in their personal lives, and, to get all the things that they want to come their way within reason. And so if they can have that in Baton Rouge, great. And if they can't, please leave Baton Rouge and go be happy. So Baton Rouge has a lot of work to do in that space. That whole LGBT thing Kip Holden tried to pass that didn't pass. It caused a lot of people to leave Baton Rouge who were, creatives and thought leaders and bright people. Right. And, Baton Rouge has got to get out of its own way in those spaces to some degree so that Baton Rouge can fly. I always tell business leaders and business entrepreneurs when it comes to employees and pay, if you think about it, if you pay people more, if you pay people fairly, they're just going to spend the money right back with you. It's not like if you give me $15 an hour as a minimum wage person, that I'm going to go start a car dealership and then I'm going to buy all the cars from me. If you give somebody a $15 an hour job, they're going to go buy a car from you, Mr. Car Dealership. They're going to buy groceries from you, Mr. Grocery Store owner or real estate agent or insurance guy. Right. And so at some point, people have got to realize that if you pay people fairly and stop just gouging the market in profits, you pay people fairly, the money's going to come back to you, and you're going to have a whole lot happier and healthier working population, workforce. I think companies will want to come to Baton Rouge. Companies will want to come to this region because if not, what we're going to be is we're going to be the armpit of the nation. Only heavy pollutant type companies are going to want to come here, and a lot of the heady type professions won't, because the school system will preclude them from coming here because they're not going to be able to get the people with education and acumen to do the jobs that are necessary in those spaces. So Baton Rouge has got to pick it up. They got to get a mindset that we're going to realize that we need to change our economy from petrochemical driven so much to some of these new technologies that are out there. And I think if we embrace it, a lot of young people not only will stay, but more young people will come. And Pastor Smith, in the church business, if you don't have some babies crying in the church, your church is dying.
That's right.
Right. And so, ultimately Baton Rouge needs to have a lot of young families with young kids who are coming and really enjoying our culture, enjoying all the things that are good about Baton Rouge. So my hope is that my kids can enjoy that, and if they can't, hello Houston, hello whatever, San Francisco, Nashville, Atlanta, Charlotte. There are some cities out there that are really, really, really doing it and making it attractive for people to come and live in their spaces. So
I really appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you,
I know
sir.
You're a busy man, but I thank you for taking time to come and share with us.
All right.
Thank you for viewing. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next time.